video tutorial, I'm going to go over three things. So we can see we have our render here. And so the first thing I'm going to show is how to create and load in an HDRI map into your scene. And so what that is it's basically, if you look at this render, it looks like it's kind of in an environment, right? We can see some reflections from the lights in a room. And so an HDRI map is a great way to kind of get that kind of naturalistic lighting into your scene using Arnold. So that's the first thing that I'm going to show. The second thing I'm going to show is how to create an area light. And that's my favorite kind of light to use. In Arnold, you can use it for 3-point lighting. And in this case, I'm just going to load in one light and show you how you can kind of use that. And then finally, the third thing I'm going to show is how to use the Hypershade to just load in some materials and use the AI standard surface material to kind of simulate things like chrome, glass, and metal and tires and all that good stuff. So I'm going to close out the scene and open up a new scene where I'd kind of remove my lights and my materials. And let's get started. So the first thing we need to do is find an HDRI map to use. And so online at the time of this recording, Polyhaven is a good site to use. There's a bunch of other options as well though. But on Polyhaven, if you go to Assets and then HDRIs, you can find these maps right here. And so you can see it's really well organized. So think to yourself, what kind of environment do you want your model to look like it's existing in? And let me just load in. These are kind of gray for some reason. One thing that I recommend is, this is a good example right here. So remember, this is going to project onto your model from every direction. And so if I were to use this HDRI map, for instance, my scene would look really blue, okay? And so just keep in mind, if you want the lighting to kind of stay neutral, to just find an HDRI map that has kind of more neutral color. So for example, in mine, I'm gonna go into Studio and use one of these studio environments right here. So I can kind of get some of these reflections coming through, but any color decisions I can make on my own. But it really is totally subjective. It just depends on what you want to use. So I've already downloaded one of these, and you want to throw it into your source images folder in your Maya project, right? So you just press download on one of those, and then I have my Maya project under source images, and this is a little bit of a mess here, but you can see I loaded my HDRI map right here. I'm on a Mac, so if I tap spacebar, I can see a preview of what I've downloaded. Okay? And so like a JPEG, stuff like that, try not to use that stuff. Try to get your HDRI map from a place like this. Okay, so let's go over how we can load that in. It's really straightforward. So I have that in my source images folder. I'm going to go to Arnold, and then Lights, and then Sky Dome Light right here. And so this creates a Sky Dome Light. Before, if I had pressed render, I would have just had a pitch black scene. And now that I created that Sky Dome light, I'm going to have basically this white projected onto my model from every direction. It creates this globe going around my entire scene, and it's just projecting white from every direction. So if I press render, I have that. So let me push this off to the side. And so what we need to do is we need to load that HDRI map onto our Sky Dome. So I'm just going to click on my Sky Dome, or select it down here in my outliner. And over here where it says color in the attribute editor, so just make sure your Sky Dome is on this tab in the attribute editor. And under color, I'm going to click the checkerboard to load a file. So this is going to come up, and then I'm going to choose file out of these options. And finally, I'm just going to click on this folder and locate that image that I downloaded off of Polyhaven. So I'm just going to click there, and it should automatically go to my source images, and it's an EXR file that I have, and so I'm going to press open, and so you can see that HDRI map comes in. And something that's cool here is I can select the HDRI map, and then if I press E on my keyboard or rotate, I can rotate the direction that this is projecting onto my scene. And so you can see the light change as I rotate around, so you can see that main shadow forming around my car. And yeah, we can kind of begin to adjust this thing. The effect of the HDRI map is going to be amplified a lot more when we start loading in metallic textures and just anything that can reflect back onto our model. So that's kind of the basics of that. We can also, I think one of the main things that I like to control in the HDRI map is we have the intensity right here. And so if I bring that down to 0, it's going to go back to pitch black. And so as I introduce lights, oftentimes I like to take my HDRI map, and it really depends on which one you're using, and, make it go down to 0.25 or something like that, so that when I start to create area lights, I can begin to create an environment or a scene. Okay, so that's kind of the main thing you need to know for an HDRI map. So continue to press forward here. I want to create an area light so I can just have a little bit of control over the way that I light this scene, or some customization here. And so I go to Arnold, and then lights, and then area light. And it's going to show up, in my case, it's kind of under the car. So I'm just going to, if you can't see your area light, just press W, and then I'll just pull it up right here. And so let's press F to focus in on this. So an area light it behaves a whole lot like a light in real space here. And basically, if I'm going to turn off my HDRI map, so I'm going to turn that to 0. And when this comes in, this line that's on my area light, let's see if it'll let me select, there we go. So it's going to be pointing in that direction. Whichever direction that line is shooting off into is going to be the direction that it's aiming. Something else that's going on here, and I'm just going to press E to rotate this down, and if I hold J, I can snap it by 15-degree increments. The intensity is really low down here. So right now the intensity is at 1, and that's not really doing anything. And so even if I pull the slider all the way up to 10, you can see it's barely affecting my model. And so what you need to do is I need to just change this, and I need to type in a number that's bigger than 10. So if I type in 500, for instance, there we go. So now it's starting to actually light our scene. So that's a big problem that I see a lot of people run into, is they pull the slider all the way up to 10, and they're like, I have my light at max, but it's not doing anything. And that's just a weird function within Arnold. And so generally speaking, it depends on the size of your scene. So my car is really tiny. If we look at this grid, that grid is centimeters right there. So my model is kind of like a toy car essentially here in real life scale. And so 800 kind of does it for me here. But if my model was bigger, I would need the intensity of my light to be stronger in order to get the effect. So let's look at the way the area lights. And so you can see I can update it in real time using the Arnold render and kind of position this the way that I want. And something that I like to do is I like to just turn down my skydome light while I'm positioning the area light to kind of find my lighting here. And so let's go over a few more details of the area light. So one thing that's really interesting about the area light is it works the way lights work in real life. And what I mean by that is, let me press F to focus in on it, and then I'll press R to scale. And so I'm going to scale this way down so that it's just a really small light. And now look at these shadows right here. You see how it has those hard shadows? So think into the past when you've used like a flashlight at night. A flashlight at night is a really small light source, and it's going to cast really hard shadows. Like if you think about like a horror video game, like that might be an instance where you might see some of those hard shadows used, or like a Tim Burton movie. So if you want that kind of style, just make your area light really small just by simply scaling it down. And if you want softer light, so if we wanted to go for like just a more refined look, like maybe something with a softer shadow, we just need to make that area light larger. And so that's one of the main tricks with an area light to use. Another trick is you can change the color of the light. So, if I want it to be a red light or whatever color that I want it to be right there, I can just change that function at that point. And as a final little trick, this is something that I like to use sometimes. I'm not going to really use it in this render, but the spread right there. So that works like barn doors in a light, where you can just kind of narrow it down and kind of focus it into a really specific region. So the spread is a really helpful tool just to kind of control how broad do you want your light to be affecting your scene. Okay, and so really those are the main things you need to know about an area light. And so this scene, in a later tutorial, we're going to go over 3-point lighting, which is a really nice system of lighting to use to create a really nice scene. But I want to just kind of speed through some simple concepts here and just kind of introduce them. And so we only really need, in this instance, I feel like one area light, one sky dome, and I think we'll be in pretty good shape. So I'm going to turn my sky dome intensity back on a little bit. And so now I have the sky dome and the area light. Oh, and there's one thing I forgot to mention with the sky dome light. So you can see in my render, my sky dome or my HDRI map is showing through. So let's fix that real quick. So I have the sky dome, and I'm just looking over here to my attribute editor where I was changing the intensity before. And if I scroll down to where it says visibility, so we have the camera visibility right there. So right now it's set to 1. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to slide this to 0, and the light from the sky dome is going to continue to shine down on my object, but its visibility won't show up on my render back here where my mouse is showing. So let me just turn that down, and there we go. Okay, so as the last part of this tutorial, I want to just start talking about using the AI standard surface shaders to kind of fill in basic materials on our object. And so I'm not going to go too deep into this, but I just want to kind of hit on the fundamentals here. So this button right here will take you to the Hypershade menu. So we have the Hypershade menu here. And let me see if I can I'm going to bring this to full screen and then back again to see if I can there we go, get some of these a little bit larger. So the materials that we have loaded into our scene are going to show up here. We have our menu where we can create new materials in this panel. Our node network will show up here. We're going to get you should get a material preview once we start loading materials in this panel. And then finally, in this lower panel, you should see the attributes of whichever material we're creating. So let's create a few materials here. So we're not gonna use Maya shaders, we're gonna use Arnold shaders. That's super important. So Arnold and then shader, and I'm just gonna click on where it says the word shader. I'm gonna scroll down to where it says AI standard surface. And this is the material we're gonna use 100% of the time during this tutorial. So I'm just gonna click on that. And over here is the node view. And you navigate this the same way you do the perspective view in Maya. So I just hold Option, and if I middle mouse click, I can pan. If I right click and drag left to right, I zoom in and out. And so this creates an AI standard surface. And so this node is just our main material. And if we load in files to get textures, they'll show up in the node network out to the side. You can also see that surface, that AI standard surface, gets generated right in this section. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this the car paint material. And so there's 2 places I can name it, and it's really important as you're adding materials to name them as you're creating them. So I'm just going to double click in the properties panel, and I'll just call this car paint 1 and press return, and you can see it updates right there. I could have also, if I wanted to rename it, I can right click up here and go down to rename it. So by default, if we want to add this material to our object, let me just pan around. So there's 2 ways we can add this material. I can click on the object, and then I can right click where my cursor is, and then just assign to material to selection. And so that's my favorite way to update a material. I'll also do it for the car door. And the other thing I could have done is I could have middle mouse clicked and then dragged it onto the material just like that. So nothing much changed. It's just an AI standard surface. It's slightly more plasticky than the standard Lambert that comes in a scene. And something I really like about the AI standard surface, though, is there's a lot of customization we can do, and we can make this material look like just about anything here. So I'm going to click on this to bring back the properties panel. And let's look at what changes in this material viewer as we adjust some of these parameters. So basically all I'm going to mess with in this just kind of beginner's preview is just the base and the specular. And so we have the main color. So right now it's gray. And if I change it to red, it turns red, etc. And down here, I want to just skip down to metalness. So right now this looks like a plastic material. And the further I drag that up, the more metallic this material starts to become. So if I want a chrome kind of material, basically there's a few things we need to do, but you know, essentially if I just slide up the metalness slider, you can see it almost looks like a chromed out finish right there. And so that's a really helpful slider to keep in mind. So let's kind of bring that back down and let's skip down to specular. So specular, we have the weight of the specularity, and so let's look at the material when I drag that down. So you can see it becomes a much more matte material, and then bringing up the weight of the specularity as those white shine. So these aren't reflections, but they're it's like the white highlights you see on an object. So we can change the color of the specular highlights in this section. So you can see I changed it to red. So that changes the specular highlights there. Most of the time I want my specular highlights to be a light color, a white, off-white, you know, that kind of thing. And so the last thing I want to show in this beginner's kind of preview is the roughness of the specularity. So if it's down, you can see that specularity becomes really sharp. And then as I bring it up, it starts to soften up to the point where it even disappears. And so kind of more and more kind of plastic. I mean, I guess all this looks plastic, but like a shiny plastic into a less shiny plastic looking kind of thing. And then we have the metalness slider. And so these are two really good kind of sliders to be kind of experimenting with. And so we'll use that some, but I think what I want to do is just keep things super basic. And so here's a little hack that we can do. So do you see this presets button right here? So if I click on that and I hold it down, you can see that Arnold has a bunch of presets that we can choose from to kind of get us started on the right path. So we can choose things like skin, diamond, you know, glass. There's all kinds of stuff that we can choose here, and these are just some really nice kind of starting points to use when you start roughing in a material. So to get started, there's two, if I remember correctly, there's two car paint options. So there's car paint right here, and then there's two-tone car paint. So I'll choose two-tone, and so I'll press replace. We could replace it by 10%, and so you can blend materials by doing that, but I'm just going to entirely replace it. And so there we go. It kind of starts us off with a pretty nice material. And so we have the specular highlights right there, and then we have the color. And so let's just say that I want this to be more of a red color. So I'll just kind of bring the base color to there, maybe a little bit warmer. And then for the specular highlights, I'm going to kind of do a similar thing where I'm going to bring it over to that reddish area. And I just generally prefer just like at least like a desaturated color for that. So let's just see where we are with the car here. And so, okay, that looks all right. So I can tell there's some adjustments that I need to make in order to get the scene working the way that I want to. So first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to maybe move my area light back a little bit. And I think I want to take its intensity down a good amount. And I'm going to do the same thing for the sky dome. So the sky dome, I'm just going to select it in my outliner or click on it in my preview button and scroll up. And let's take that intensity down a little bit. I'm kind of going for a darker render on this, as you can probably tell. And remember with the sky dome, I can press E and see if, there we go. And I can rotate it and kind of set this location in a way where the highlights are kind of hitting in a way that I want it to. And being able to preview this in real time is just really helpful. So I could obsess over this for a long time, but this is a tutorial, and so I'm just trying to keep this relatively quick. And let's take this and maybe I want to go for more of a rim lighting thing. It just really depends how you want your lighting to look in your scene. And this is something that I usually spend a fair amount of time working on to kind of get perfect. And in the scene, usually what I'm going to do is set up three lights. I'll have a three-pointing lighting scheme, and again, that's something I'm going to talk about in a later tutorial, to kind of get this thing lit from a few different directions and get like a really nice render. So let's just kind of keep it moving here. So we have the car paint material. So let's create some glass next. So we need some glass for our window. So in the Hypershade, I'm just going to clear this. So I have my nodes showing up right there. And there's just two buttons that I use in this section. So I use this button to clear out this graph. It doesn't delete it. It just kind of moves it out of the way. And if I ever want to pull back a material, I can press this double play button. So I can clear that. And then if I ever want to bring that back, I can just select car paint, press the double play button, and bring it right back. So double play button, clear button. Those are my two main buttons that I like to use down here. So let's create another AI standard surface. So I'm going to click AI standard surface just like we did before. So over here under Arnold, Shader, AI standard surface. And let's just quickly name this. I'm going to name this glass. And under presets, I'm just going to click that, hold it down, and there is a glass preset that we can use. There we go. And so one thing that you'll see is, so we've talked about base and specular, but there's another section called transmission. And right now it's pretty much like 100% transparent. So the more I drag down the weight of the transmission, the less transparent it becomes. And so with glass, generally speaking, glass is rarely 100% transparent. So maybe just like, just inch it down just a little bit right there. That's all I'm doing. Cool. So we're ready to go. So I have my car window, and I'm not doing a good job closing all my windows. I just want to kind of keep them all visible here. So I'm going to select my glass, and then notice that I named it in my Hypershade. Just keep naming things. So assign material to selection, and there we go. So we have some glass showing up. So let me switch my render to my perspective view. And so one thing that's really important with glass is I find it, I need some more geometry in here as you can see, but the glass, it has a little bit, it just looks better if the glass is in 3 dimensions. So you can see I have a face on the front and on the back of this glass material. So if you make your glass 3-dimensional, this glass shader will look a whole lot nicer in your renders, in my opinion. So that's just something to keep in mind in your process. So if I was really fine-tuning this, I would continue to mess with the shader on the car paint just to get that looking really nice, you know. So in that scene, I can kind of bring that one back. And something I can do is I can just drag up, you know, the metalness a little bit, you know, maybe for the specularity, the roughness, just bring it down a little bit so that those reflections are a little bit sharper. And let's see how that, you know, just continue to make adjustments on your shaders, and, you know, don't just be content with something that just looks mediocre, you know. So continue to kind of fine tune and adjust these things as you continue to progress. So we have glass on the windshield. I'm going to try to keep things quick. I'm just going to add that glass onto that front light. And okay, so let's go ahead and make some chrome. So I'm going to clear this out, and we're just going to keep making material. So Arnold, shader, AI standard surface, we're going to just rinse and repeat a few times. So new shader, and again, I'd be really sure to name this because this section up here is going to populate really rapidly, and if you don't name things, it turns into an absolute mess. It's really bad. So just name stuff as you're creating it. So I'm going to create a chrome shader, and so presets, and then we have chrome at the very top, replace. There we go. And I am going to just add that to the back of my tail light. Assign material to selection. I'm going to also add it right here. Assign material to selection. And I'm just going to add this to my hubcaps just to kind of keep things moving quickly. So on my hubcaps, I'm just going to select all this stuff. Oh, you know what will be easier is I have it grouped down here. So I'll just go to select it. You can also select objects in your outliner if that's easier than making a selection in your perspective view. And assign material to selection. I'll do the same for over here. So that was the first wheel. I'll go to the second wheel and assign material to selection. Okay, so you know we're moving here. So Next up, we have the tires. So I'm going to clear this out. Same as I've been doing, Arnold shader AI standard surface, and I'm going to name it. So double click, tire. And on this one, let's see what we have on terms of presets. I don't know if I'm going to have anything that really sticks out to me as like an awesome option, and so this might be one that I just kind of build from scratch. Let's see what happens when I click on rubber. That's not bad. Okay, so rubber is a pretty good one. I might make this just a tad darker. Let's look at the specularity. I'm going to bring the specularity down just a little bit. I do like that roughness. Yeah, we need the specularity roughness to kind of be up. We don't want that, right, for tires. So the roughness of the specularity is in a pretty good spot. Let's just see what this looks like. So remember I named it right here. And so I'm going to select both of my tires. So click on that one, hold shift, click on that one, and then right click. Oops, right click, assign to material. Let's check our render down here. This is a dark render, so I can kind of get away with some stuff. You know, that's looking pretty decent. Okay. So next up, I have two more objects here. So I have my base down here, and so this is just for display purposes. And so, you know, we can choose just about anything. It just depends on what kind of style that you want. And then the last thing that I have is I have this rough chassis that I built in. And so let me solo that so you can see it. I just basically built, so show, isolate, view selected. I just built a really rough chassis just so that the light wouldn't show through my model when it's lit, right? So it just doesn't look completely hollowed out. So for that, I just need like a black material that's really basic to make it so the light's not showing through. So I'm going to unsolo that by going to show, isolate, and then view selected. There we go. We're back in business. So very quickly, I'm just going to go clear this out. Arnold shader, AI standard surface shader. And I'm just going to call this chassis. And on this one, I am just going to take the color down. I'm going to take the metalness down, specularity down most of the way, roughness up. Just trying to get something that doesn't look unnatural, but is just totally out of the way. So there we go. So I'm going to click on the chassis. It's all one object. And then I'm just going to right click, assign material to selection. So now that's just kind of getting out of my way a little bit. So finally, we're on to the base. And so the base, this can just be whatever material you want it to be. Okay, so I am just going to follow the same step I've been doing, shader, and then AI standard surface under Arnold. And I'm just going to call this the base. And yeah, this is totally up to you what you want it to be, right? So what do I even want this to be? Let's just have this be, I'm going to just kind of create my own thing for the most part. So I'm going to have this kind of be a darker material. And let's add, specularity is good. Let's take that down. So I switched it to Chrome. I'm just kind of trying out some different things. I just want to see this. I like the model to kind of reflect back a little bit. So I wonder about, well, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add this material to the base so that I can preview it and see what it looks like in real time. So I'm going to click on the base and then right click, assign material to selection. And so what I did there is I created a chrome material and then I took the base color down. And so I have, you know, so I'm kind of going for a dark render look here. And so what that does is it has some nice reflectivity to the scene and has a darker setting. And so I'm not going to kind of spend a ton of time going over all that stuff because really for that last material, it's just, you know, it depends on what kind of scene you're going for, right? So I'm not trying to emulate any specific thing. And yeah, you can just kind of choose it to taste. And so in the next video tutorial, I'm going to show how to add atmosphere into your scene. And so it's going to start to take this render to the next level. And then after that, I'm going to show how to create a camera in a scene and start adding depth of field. And so we can really start to fine tune this thing and get really nice renders. So that's what's coming up next.